Well, I think we can look at it three ways. First of all, the international community, how it views China's behavior in the South China Sea in terms of its flagrant rejection of the Permanent Court of Arbitration's decision rejecting all of China's claims. Second, I think that China has changed its tactics. It's moved from building artificial islands and militarizing those islands to focusing on what we call gray zone operations. So using its merchant fleet and using other techniques to put pressure on the other claimants in the South China Sea. And these are much more difficult to deal with in terms of defense. And it's a challenge for stakeholders within the region. And lastly, I think importantly, the stakeholders within the region are looking at China, looking at its power transition or how much power it's accumulated over the past 5 years. And I think there's growing concern about how they can match that growing power through gray zone operations and in general, having a concerted collective approach to pushing back against China's assertive claims.
As you say, Beijing continues to stake its claim in the disputed territory after rejecting the Hague's ruling completely, and it's not likely to change its course either.
Absolutely not. And with the 100th anniversary of the Communist Party just passing, Xi Jinping really, put the flag in the ground, stressing that China will no longer compromise on any of its core issues, whether that's the South China Sea, whether it's Taiwan or this East China Sea. And again, this really raises concerns with stakeholders within the region, whether it's Australia, Japan, South Korea, or India. How are we going to move forward to push back against Beijing and its assertive claims as it becomes increasingly powerful?
Well, the US has used the 5-year anniversary to remind China that it stands behind the ruling and the Philippines on this. How's Beijing reacted?
Well, Beijing's upset. They feel that the United States is an outside actor, that it doesn't really have a role within the region, that this is traditionally and historically China's backyard, and that outside powers like the United States and even Australia and our EU partners have no place in the discussions over the South China Sea. But that being said, the United States has really said to China that the red line is infringing upon the territories of the Philippines. The Philippines are protected by the U.S.-Philippine alliance. And this is a challenge. It's going to push China into a position where it's going to find more unorthodox ways to seek and consolidate its core interests. This will be a challenge for the international community, and I think it will be an increasingly challenge for Southeast Asian countries like the Philippines.
And also Australia, as you mentioned, Canberra's support for the 2016 ruling has reignited tensions with China. Is there anything significant to pay attention to here?
Well, I think what's most important is Australia has been very consistent in supporting what we call a rules-based order, that dealing with disputes, dealing with the South China Sea or the East China Sea or Taiwan must be done through a rules-based process. And if it's not done through a rules-based process and it's done through a Machiavellian might is right approach, then this is not a world that smaller countries like Australia or Canada or the Philippines are able to negotiate and really negotiate toe-to-toe with a huge country like China. So I think Australia's been consistent. They've been an excellent partner for many of the countries within the region, and I think Australia is going to continue to be consistent in its foreign policy of supporting a rules-based order and the idea of a free and open Indo-Pacific.
Meanwhile, how concerned should Australia be about the Chinese surveillance ship heading towards Queensland ahead of military exercises being held there this week? We've just reported on it.
So this is not the first time the Chinese have sent intelligence gathering vessels to naval activities, whether it's the Talisman exercise that you've mentioned or the RIMPAC exercises. China is trying to get the best understanding possible about Australia's capabilities and how it works with allies and partners. So in terms of a threat to Australia, I don't think it's a threat at this particular time. But over the longer term, as China gets a better understanding of Australia's capabilities and how it works with allies, that it'll be increasingly challenged to find innovative ways to push back against China in these sensitive areas like the South China Sea or the East China Sea and the Taiwan Straits.
But earlier this week, the Chinese military drove away a US warship in the South China Sea. Is this a regular occurrence, not only against American vessels, but any ship China deems to be there illegally?
Well, I think that story is from Beijing's perspective. I think it's highly unlikely that Beijing would have been able to coerce an American warship out of the South China Sea. If it was successful in doing that, it would have eroded the security guarantees that the United States does provide to all the regional stakeholders within the region. So I think that we need to be very careful how we understand this narrative. The United States would not allow this to happen. Again, it would cause a challenge, and it would raise concerns about U.S. security guarantees within the region. The U.S. has been consistent, and it will continue to be consistent in its freedom of navigation operations within the South China Sea and the region in general. And whether it's the Trump administration or the Biden administration, we've seen an increase in presence and cooperation with regional stakeholders of the United States, and I think this will continue.
And just lastly, Filipino fishermen in particular are calling on their president to do more to protect their livelihoods. We reported on this earlier this week. They fish in the Philippine West Sea, part of the South China Sea, but say they're often chased away by Chinese patrol ships. What's the likelihood of Rodrigo Duterte confronting China about this?
I think the likelihood is very low. Rodrigo Duterte, he is coming to the end of his term as president. He's trying to set up a legacy, whether it's his daughter or another political acolyte that will take over from him. But I think importantly, Duterte understands that it's probably best in the interests of the Philippines to cooperate with the Chinese and get some kind of aid, either through the BRI or other kinds of aid, vaccine diplomacy, for example, to try and bring in other partners such as Japan and the United States. And he's been effective at doing, and I assume whether Duterte, throughout Duterte's remaining term, but a future leader will likely do something similar to get as much goods from all the stakeholders within the region to meet the national interests of the Filipinos.